Hello, my name is Alicia Smith, and this is my media project number 2 for Anatomy and Physiology Lab 142 with Professor Donald Pump. So for my case study, we have patient Louise. She is a 33-year-old Caucasian female. She's 5'7" and she's 145 pounds. So Louise has been experiencing mild to moderate symptoms of a urinary tract infection, or a UTI, for 6 days that she has been trying to cure herself with at-home care. So Louise is experiencing frequent and uncomfortable urination that leaves her feeling as if she still needs to empty her bladder, but she can't fully do it. She also noticed that approximately 3 days ago, her lower abdomen felt sore and a little painful to the touch. So Louise has had a urinary tract infection before, and she has been able to clear it herself before by drinking large amounts of water and cranberry juice. She read online that cranberry juice contains a substance that helps prevent the UTI causing bacteria from sticking to the walls of the bladder, therefore making it easier for the bacteria to get flushed out when she consumes a lot of water and urinates a lot. So UTIs are very common infections that occur basically when bacteria enters the urethra, otherwise known as the pee hole, and travels to the urinary tract. This bacteria can be introduced from the vulva, fecal matter from the rectum, or from a sexual partner. And the bacteria then will travel up to the bladder, which will cause a bladder infection, which is really what a urinary tract infection is. And that is why you will notice symptoms of painful urination and difficulty urinating or fully expressing the bladder. So here's an image to give a better idea of how the bacteria goes up into the bladder and how that can be very uncomfortable, as it can really irritate the lining of the bladder. So after 7 days, Louise is not having any luck getting her UTI to clear on her own. And in fact, her symptoms are getting much worse. She's now experiencing an extremely painful burning sensation when she urinates. She also has a high fever, chills, and she's in severe pain in her back, sides, and in her lower abdomen. So she goes to urgent care because she's starting to fear that something's really wrong with her and she can't handle to fix it on her own. So after Louise's doctor tests her blood and urine, the doctor diagnoses Louise with pyelonephritis, or a kidney infection. So what a kidney infection is basically when bacteria from the bladder is left untreated for too long and travels further up into the kidneys. So you can see in the diagram right here that the bladder is much lower and it is connected to the kidneys via the ureters. So that bacteria can actually continue to travel up and then start to infect other parts of the body, and the kidneys are the next line up after the bladder. So women are more likely to get a kidney infection than men because they have a shorter urethra than men do. So therefore the infection can travel quicker and faster from the bladder to the kidneys. And I have another diagram of what it might look like when the kidney does get infected. It can become very inflamed and irritated, thus causing that pain in her back and sides, as that's kind of where the kidneys are located in the body. So the urinary system is responsible for blood filtration and waste and excess water removal. So when we're talking about the kidneys, that's how we're relating to the urinary system. So the waste is excreted in the form of urine, which is made up mostly of water and small amounts of urea, which is a waste product that's formed from proteins in the urine, and then another component called urochrome, which is a blood product which gives urine its yellow color. So the urinary system contains a series of organs that urine needs to pass through in order to fully excrete toxins and waste products out of the body. So you can see in the male and female, the urinary system is quite similar. The only difference is in males, they have a prostate, which women do not have. And the urethra is longer in males. So when we're looking at the organs of the urinary system, the system contains 2 kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra. So the kidneys are constantly working to filter toxins from the blood and to create waste that needs to be excreted via the urine. So the body has 2 kidneys, but it can actually function with just one if it needs to. And the kidneys filter around 120 to 150 quarts of blood a day, which then produces about 1 to 2 quarts of urine each day. So the ureters, as we saw in the last slide, are the 2 long tubes. They're about 9 inches long that carry the urine from the kidneys down into the bladder. So what the bladder does is it holds the urine, and it's in kind of like a hollow, fleshy balloon shaped muscle, basically, that can expand to accommodate a higher volume of urine. So the urine is held in the bladder until it is emptied when a person chooses to urinate, and it can hold up to around 2 cups of urine. And then finally, the urethra is the tube that carries pee from the bladder and out of the body. So the urethra has a sphincter or a few sphincter muscles that are able to open and contract, giving a person control over when they urinate. So the reproductive system in women, moving into that, we have the female reproductive system to start. So the female reproductive system produces hormones in the body, and it's responsible for fertility, which is the ability to conceive children. It's responsible for a woman's menstrual cycle and all sexual activity. And it consists of both external and internal parts, as you can see in the diagram here. So the external parts include the labia majora and minora, the clitoris, the vaginal opening, the hymen, and the urethra opening. So all of these parts help to protect the vagina from infection and to aid the sperm in entering the vagina to reproduce a child. And then the internal parts, which you can see in the top part of the diagram, include the vagina, the cervix, the uterus, ovaries, and the fallopian tubes. So the ovaries contain eggs that can be fertilized by the male reproductive cell, which is sperm, and that will develop into a fetus in the uterus, and then a child will be birthed through the vaginal opening of a woman. And then looking at the reproductive system in men, so same functions essentially. It gives the body the ability to urinate through the urethra, just like a woman, to be able to have sexual function and to reproduce biological offspring. But of course, a man cannot carry a child because they don't contain a uterus. So the male reproductive system consists of the penis, the scrotum, and the testicles. And the male reproductive system relies on hormones to be able to function properly. So the main hormones that are involved in this system are follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, luteinizing hormone, or LH, and then testosterone. Whereas women, their main sex hormone is estrogen. So how do we relate the reproductive system to a kidney infection? The reproductive system may be affected if Louise were to continue to have chronic kidney infections. So it actually has been found that people that suffer from CKD, or chronic kidney disease, may experience reduced fertility and an increased risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes. So things like preterm delivery or fetal growth restriction, and then preeclampsia have all been found to increase in risk for those that suffer from chronic kidney disease. So the reproductive system in men connects to the urinary system, as the urethra is a common passageway for both urine and sperm. And then in women, the urethra is separate from the vaginal opening. So CKD may cause issues with a woman's fertility because increased uremic toxins may lead to impaired ovarian function. So the toxins that are being produced when infection is happening in the kidneys over time can start to damage other areas and cause issues with their function and ability to reproduce, essentially. So moving into the digestive system. So the main purpose of the digestive system is to allow the body to digest and absorb nutrients from food that is consumed via the mouth. So the body relies on the nutrients it gets from food, and these nutrients are things like carbohydrates, fats, minerals, vitamins, and water. And they need those nutrients in order to function properly for all the body systems and to maintain homeostasis in the body. So the digestive system breaks down nutrients, and it, over time in the body, converts it into energy and cell growth and repair. So there's several organs that are involved in the digestive system that I'll briefly touch on. So that includes the mouth, the esophagus, the small and large intestines, stomach, and the rectum and anus. So the digestive system is also assisted by the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, which can all sort of be included in the digestive system as well. So looking into the different organs and then what they do. So the mouth uses the teeth, the tongue, and the salivary glands to help break down the food that is being consumed and allow it to be easily swallowed. And when we say swallowed, that means it's going into the esophagus, which is the tube in the throat that is right next to the trachea, which is your windpipe. And it uses muscular contractions to force the food from the mouth down into the stomach. And the stomach is the hollow organ that holds your food while it's being mixed up and broken down by enzymes that are inside the stomach acid. So the small intestine is a 22-foot long tube that uses bile, which we get from the liver, and enzymes, which we get from the pancreas, to continue to break down food and start the process of letting the body absorb nutrients from the food. So the large intestine, otherwise known as the colon, basically processes waste that is left over from the food, and stool begins to form, or fecal matter. And so then finally we get into the rectum, and basically the rectum is a holding chamber for the stool, and it starts to alert the brain that the bowels are full and need to be evacuated. And finally, when it is ready for that, the body will have a bowel movement and it will be excreted from the anus. So that relates to kidney infection because the digestive system is actually very closely related to the urinary system. The bladder actually meets the rectum and colon. And the inflammation response from a kidney infection can produce heat and other systemic changes that can in turn cause distress to the surrounding body systems. So these changes may increase fluid production and movement, and that can actually result in the diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting we see. That is all very common symptoms that can be associated with kidney infection. So kidney infection, the causes and risk factors for it. So a kidney infection happens when harmful bacteria such as E. coli can travel up into the kidney. And that usually happens by going from the urinary tract into the bladder and then eventually up into the kidney. So in rare cases, a kidney infection can also be caused from other bacteria in the bloodstream that comes from other parts of the body, but typically the most likely scenario is it's coming from the urinary tract. So someone is more at risk for a kidney infection if they are female, as we talked about in a previous slide. Females have a shorter urethra, so the travel time for bacteria is quicker and easier. And if someone has a weakened immune system, such as having HIV, they are less able to fight off any infection properly, resulting in kidney infection. If you use a urinary catheter for, say, a routine procedure for something else, that can introduce new bacteria. And then another thing we see is if someone has nerve damage, especially in like the spinal cord that's near the bladder area, they may have nerve damage and not be able to feel if they have a UTI, and therefore their symptoms of a UTI persist. And over time they become a kidney infection because someone doesn't notice that they even have a UTI in the first place because they can't feel it. So how do we cure a kidney infection? Louise's doctor decides that it is best to hospitalize Louise and treat her with IV antibiotics because she's having vomiting and diarrhea, and he's worried that she's getting very dehydrated and she won't be able to hold down any oral medications that he wants to give her. So after 2 days in the hospital on IV antibiotics, she's showing great improvement. Her symptoms of vomiting have stopped, and she's able to go home and finish out the rest of her antibiotics at home just via a twice daily oral pill. So no further treatment was required for Louise, luckily, but her doctor did recommend that she stays very hydrated and uses any over-the-counter pain and anti-inflammatory medications as needed if she is having any persisting pain in her lower back or abdomen. So in some rare cases, kidney infections can become recurrent, and that may indicate that the person has an underlying disease or condition that we may be missing. So at that point, if we're seeing a kidney infection multiple times in a year or a few years, your doctor may refer you to a urologist or a nephrologist, which is either a urinary or a kidney specialist. And if Louise continues to have issues with kidney infection, that would be her next step. So I think that's the end of my presentation. Here's just a few works cited from all the different sources I used to create this presentation. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great rest of your day.